Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. My next guest is William Galston. He's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. So, Bill, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
Bill, so I wanted to have you on today to talk about your piece in the Journal earlier this week defending the National Endowment for Democracy, in part because last week we interviewed someone who has emerged as a major critic of NED, as it's called, and that's Jim Pearson. Apparently, NED is in the crosshairs of Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, but you think it deserves to live on. What's the argument for continuing NED funding?
It's very simple. No organization on earth has done more to promote and defend freedom over the past 4 decades than the National Endowment for Democracy. And just to get one, bad argument out of the way quickly, NED was not founded simply as an anti-Soviet or anti-communist entity. It is a pro-freedom entity, and the threats to freedom did not end when the Soviet Union went away.
So, as you say, it was founded, I guess, in about 1983, correct? It was sort of a Reagan-era initiative and was really regarded at the time as sort of an important step in fighting communism through ideas. But when we talk about promoting democracy, that's a little different. What's the difference in your mind between fighting communism with ideas and promoting freedom with ideas?
Well, promoting freedom was the National Endowment for Democracy's way of opposing communism on the terrain of ideas, but not only that, putting money in the form of small grants in the hands of people who shared this passion for democracy in countries around the world, including countries that were only partially democratic or ruled by autocrats and dictators. So the strategy was to empower the ideas that NED was founded to promote. And it has been, I'm not a neutral here. I served on NED's board for 9 years, and I made that very clear when I wrote my Wall Street Journal piece. But I was involved in reviewing thousands and thousands of grants on an annual basis. And you can't take a fair-minded look at what NED was doing without being impressed by the breadth of their effort, the integrity of the grant-making process, and the quality of the results. And you can, in a portfolio that big, you can always pick out a few bad apples, but they did not spoil the barrel.
So talking about bad apples, I mean, they've gotten a lot of criticism for that funding. They gave $230,000 to the Global Disinformation Index. It's a British nonprofit. What the GDI does is they compile a list of websites that they accuse of peddling disinformation. Then major advertising companies use that to blacklist American news organizations identified by GDI, or at least that's the accusation. I think the State Department got sued over this. And I should say that Real Clear ended up on this list because we publish articles we aggregate articles from a lot of different sources. So inevitably, you want to talk about bad apples. I mean, inevitably, we're linking to all sorts of different types of stories. But I mean, what do you make of that? People think that that was really an overreach and also sort of was a way that the State Department got involved in domestic politics in a way that I don't think anyone would condone.
Look, that grant was a mistake. And it's my understanding, subject to correction, that when these arguments were presented to the National Endowment for Democracy, they acknowledged it had been a mistake and terminated the grant. I am not defending that specific decision, but I am asking fair-minded listeners and viewers to put that in the context of more than 2,000 other grants the National Endowment made that year.
I guess the other argument, and people should go back and listen to the interview with Jim Pearson. Really interesting to have these two interviews side by side. So I appreciate you coming on to do this. That the people, or at least the staff at this point, are not only because they are pro-democracy or anti-authoritarian, some of them have identified Trump as being an authoritarian figure, and thus again have sort of crossed over into becoming a critique of American domestic politics as well as what's going on overseas.
Uh, it is always possible to cherry pick staff, as it is possible to cherry pick grants. Mr. Pearson, among other things, picked out a couple of members of the board, including Anne Applebaum, whose pronouncements on autocracy and populism and nationalism he didn't particularly like. He went on to charge that those opinions had become integrated into the official charter of the NED, which is flat out false. The official charter has not changed, and there is no evidence that this perspective, which is no doubt shared by some members of the staff as well as some members of the NED board, has actually made its way into NED's activities. And so once again, the argument from particular examples to general conclusions is, in my mind, completely unpersuasive.
And I'm sort of curious as to why they're sort of focused on zeroing out the budget. And Trump has done this before. I mean, back in, I think, 2018, he tried to cut NED's budget. NED gives a lot of grants to sort of 4 different groups: a labor group, a business group, and 2 others. You probably could tell us.
There's a National Democratic Institute,
right,
which is
2 parties,
Democratic
right,
oriented, and a Republican Democratic Institute, which is Republican oriented. Look, let me tell you what I think is really behind all of this.
Please do.
A central figure in this debate about national conservatism, populism, etc., is Viktor Orban.
Oh, okay.
And as I recall, Mr. Pearson made a reference to Viktor Orban. So,
tell our viewers who Viktor Orban is.
Viktor
really
Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he has sponsored and carried out a program of what he calls illiberal democracy. In the phrase liberal democracy, the liberal doesn't refer to the antonym of conservative. It refers to a body of institutions and guarantees for individuals, for minority groups, for people who want to peacefully assemble to petition their government for redress of their grievances, etc. All of the guarantees that are included in the Bill of Rights, as well as in our basic constitutional architecture, to prevent tyranny coming from any source, including the tyranny of the majority. Viktor Orban rejects that. He thinks it's just fine for the government of Hungary to own outright or through intermediaries 90% of Hungary's media. He thinks it's just fine to reduce the independence of the judiciary. He thinks it's just fine to send into exile an entire university whose orientation he did not like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the populist nationalist movement thinks that Budapest is the new Rome and Viktor Orban is its pope. And fair-minded observers like Freedom House have documented the damage that Viktor Orban has done to both freedom and democracy since he's become the unchallenged leader of Hungary. And nationalists and populists reject that critique, even though it's factual.
Well, so in your view, then, this really comes down to sort of a foreign policy difference over how to treat Hungary.
But Hungary is, what the grammarians call a synecdoche. That is, it stands for a way of thinking about democracy that is hostile to the restraints on the power of the majority that liberal democracy believes is fundamental. I take Viktor Orban at his word. He is an illiberal Democrat. He believes in majorities, largely because he gets them so regularly. He does not believe in restraints on his majority.
And so we got about a minute left here, Bill, and I'm talking to Bill Galston. He has written this very interesting piece, which it's on our front page today. As a matter of fact, it's on this National Endowment of Democracy question. What do you think is going to happen?
I have no idea. I really have no idea. I hope that uh, the many friends on both sides of the aisle that Ned has developed over the past 40 years will come to its defense in its hour of maximum peril. Whether that will be enough, I don't know.
Could it continue if government funding was cut? Because it's
That's
a
a shallow
non-government
theory.
organization, it has its own board.
All true, but
Mhm.
right now it receives about $300 million a year.
Right,
There's no way that I think private contributions could replace more than a small fraction of
right.
that. And it would be the end of the National Endowment for Democracy as we now know it.
Hmm. Well, Bill, we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have you back. We're going to keep an eye on this story. It's very interesting. I'm Andrew
Great.
Allworth.
Pleasure to be here.
You've
Pleasure
been
to be here.
listening. Oh, good. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. My guest has been William Galston, and we'll be back after this.